I'm Sean Maloney, Digital Business Masters. Another overview. Week commencing the 28th of um, April 2025. Okay. Fascinating times that we're living in right now. Unbelievable times. Times that we would have hoped for. We could only hope for, even just a year ago, and now in our midst, as finally, bosses, banks, and governments are starting to understand what it is to put digital assets on their books. Yeah. Very few business activities are going to outpace a 60, 70, 80%, even more, what was 150% yield than Bitcoin. And they're slowly but surely starting to realize that if you interconnect globally with lots of other companies and individuals and governments and bosses and banks doing the same thing on one interconnected sound money system, then you can have that as part of your balance sheet just as much as anything else you're doing to drive value into your business. Think about that. Fortunately, we spotted this many, many, many years ago. And now it's a privilege to observe so many individuals, bosses, banks, and governments start to understand it too. So our job has been to understand this for ourselves, push ourselves through this process. DBM's been around well over a decade now, and we've existed as an academy as we do our best to help other people understand what I've just said for over 5 years now. So we'll look at the big picture first of all, then we'll look at how we apply practical steps. Why we're so successful? Well, first of all, we've got longevity, pedigree, and we come from a long, long list of industrial and business activities that goes back decades. Not just myself, but the entire coaching team of the academy. Yeah, lots of business experience and what it takes to push through in this industry. So the best thing we ever did was figure out how to cash flow from digital assets, as I've just said, and now we're fully vindicated. Managing that into where you want to be is obviously an entirely different topic, right? But the fact is the model works. It's a case now of have you got the mindset and the skills to get it to work for you. And in the end, it's having the just basic knowledge that owning one Bitcoin is a more rare position than being a millionaire today. In other words, there's more millionaires on the planet than people who own one Bitcoin. And as I've said for many, many years, just own one Bitcoin. Just work towards that. But increasingly now, as Bitcoin today tips its nose past $95,000 again, and we understand and we believe this week that it will be hitting over $100,000 just this coming week now for all sorts of reasons we'll talk about. Build up to 0.1 Bitcoin. Build up to 0.1 Bitcoin, and you'll find yourself in a very, very strong position if you have what it takes to go and drive that balance sheet into position. So with that said, we're not here to give any financial advice, all right? We're certainly not here to advise you, but we are very, very passionate about education because we've found a model, we've proven a model, and we make a very good living from the model. So if it can be done once, it can be done 100,000 times. It's just a case of making sure that we help as many people as possible to go through the process, which is why the academy now is much more of a support structure than it is an education system, actually, which is okay too. That's okay. So how have we done it? Well, we've recognized, like I say, many years ago, that we need to take direct ownership of entities through varying business sectors. You don't need to be involved with every single one of these business sectors. Of course you don't. You can select the ones you want to work with. If you're starting out, we always recommend that you work with layer 2 first of all, which is where the cash flows are. So work with the sectors on this screen where you've got the green bubbles there. We were showing you the immediate yield, immediate cash flows. Don't think it's easy. These are high risk entities. They're bound to be for this type of yield per month, by the way. This is per month yield, not per year. So of course they're high risk. But the whole idea is to get yourself involved over there and work through the process, what it takes to support these companies as they look to finish what they start. That can be very difficult. Of course it can. And then once you've got the cash flows coming in, you can start to reallocate those cash flows towards assets that you believe in. That can be any number of altcoins. You see a number of altcoins on this screen. But fundamentally what you should be doing is reallocating to dollar cost averaging Bitcoin. And you get to a big enough position in Bitcoin where Bitcoin eventually becomes the engine on your balance sheet that drives the cash flow of your business. You'll hear us talk much more about that in part 2 of this video over on the systems hub and systems forum. You'll see the link below this video. Now then, just thought I'd pop this up. In social media, you get reminders of what you've been doing. This popped back up, something we published back in 2018 at DBM, and it just struck me to have a look at this, because all of us are older than we were back in 2018, and we've got a mixture of boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials. The vast majority of clients within DBM are Gen Xers and boomers. Yeah, so only you'll know where you are with this. But this, as of 2018, and unfortunately, I suggest that this is probably worse today, because it's so difficult for people to get ahead on a full fiat system that they sacrifice the future, in that they don't save, in other words. And if they are saving, then they're not realizing that the purchasing power of every dollar, pound, and euro that they're putting away is depreciating in its purchasing power by 10% a year. So it's not really about how much savings have you got, have saved for. The word saved is an anomaly in a fiat system. That's why you find so many people getting into situations where they either have to carry on working, or they have to sacrifice, an entire lifetime of built up assets, including their own homes in many cases. Now, we live longer, so quid pro quo, but at the end of the day, if you can offset this problem and live longer, God willing, then why not drive for both? Why not drive for as much as you can? So only other way you're at with this, but it's quite disheartening to see, so particularly the Gen Xers, which is my generation, and the millennials. Okay, I've got more time on their hands, but really, the disparity here is unbelievable. There's a huge amount of wealth tied up still in the baby boomer generation, which is fine, no problem with that. But their assets are only worth what they're worth if the Gen Xers and millennials are willing to pay for them. So, whichever way you look at this, you've got to take it in the round and say, well, hang on, there's something not right here. And I need to take some control, which is what we did a decade ago, and I'm glad we did. So a bit more to the point, I share this slide every single week, but it's always worth reiterating. It's all about just understanding one simple premise. If you are going to earn in fiat currency, which some people call money, it's not money, it's currency. If you are going to earn in fiat currency and then insist on spending that currency to continually buy liabilities to live life, a liability is anything that doesn't cash flow, then you're going to struggle. Even if you're earning $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 a year, it's just the nature of it. If you just look at it on a chart and go and extend that out with currency devaluing at 10% a year, and then understand why it's doing that, and understand why it's just about to accelerate in terms of its purchasing power deduction. And we take full advantage of that as it happens, because what we do is, yes, we take the same fiat currency, everybody's got to make a living, but we convert that into assets. Now, the fact that that one step itself creates a dynamic whereby your asset goes up in value and price, mainly price, value is debatable, but certainly price. The reason it goes up in price is because of the devaluing nature of fiat currency. It is as simple as that. So that's the equity side, but the yield is what we're really after. You can't run a business just off a balance sheet. Yeah, you may have been told, oh, just buy a home mortgage, pay your mortgage down 25 years, and your home will be worth more. It goes up every 7 years, blah, blah. Well, you've not cash flow from that, have you? Yeah, and you've had a job in the background that's trying to keep up with that, paying down the mortgage, looking after the kids, putting the kids through college, doing all the things, and you're getting more and more and more, into life, and you've just got more money. And you're just looking back in your 50s and even your 40s and going, why I was supposed to be ahead by now. Well, you're only going to get ahead if you're going to allocate some of that devaluing fiat currency into assets. And then you put those assets into mechanisms that cash flow, if you wish. Now, that's the hard bit. That isn't easy, and it's not for everybody. Everybody wants the result, but getting to that point is difficult. You've got to select suppliers. You saw the 14 different industry sectors that we've chosen to work with over the past decade. Yeah. And they're all in different states of finalization because we are basically early adopters, early investors going into mechanisms that create the types of yields you saw. That demands fortitude and resilience. Yeah. And it's frustrating. It really is. But it's necessary if you go in to break enough eggs to get into a position where a proportion of your assets that are depreciating anyway, especially if you own Bitcoin, are also cash flowing. It's just the nature of it. And we all want it faster and quicker, and everybody's got expectations. We fully understand it. But if you've got enough of a balance going on, we call it critical mass, to be able to reallocate and keep reallocating, you'll hear me talk about this in detail today in part 2 of this call, where we've been through the mill with a particular project over 3 years that's now come out the other side and is giving us absolute consistent ability to create thousands of dollars a month because of assets we acquired 3 years ago and the fact we've kept reallocating them and pushing them into more and more refined areas of value. And what do we do with that? Well, we take the cash flow, we don't sell the assets, we take the cash flow and we fund liabilities. Big difference. We don't buy liabilities. So understand this, and you'll be in a much better place if you're now in your 40s, 50s, 60s, looking to make a accelerated difference to maybe what you did in the first half of your life. Yeah, I can't stress it enough from my own experience. Now, before we go into some of the macro levels that are affecting all this and where we see the future, we don't predict the future, but we certainly can move into the future and visualize the future. Before we go there, just a reminder that this isn't easy to do. And all you can do is make it easier. And the only way we've found over the years to make it easier is to work with other people who also understand what I've just been saying for the past 15 minutes. Now, that involves a system. So once you've gravitated towards you a group of people that totally understand it and have the skills and pure determination to do this for themselves, and then be confident enough to go and help other people, then you've got yourself a business system. Yeah? Put a 3 in the chat if you've read the cash flow quadrant. You'll understand the power of a business system compared to just having a job or owning a job. Now, the whole idea is once you've got that group of people together, then you can start to push outwards and bring more people towards that. But those people who are doing the doing every day and putting all the effort and time and energy into something deserve income, deserve paying for that. Hence, we set up the subscription system, which is one side of what DBM does. So you then have to determine as a client, as a person, where you want to be in the speed with which you can get to a certain point. Well, you've got to determine what that point is first. You've got to know where you're sailing the boat to. You've got to have a destination. And then you bring that backwards to where you are today, and you figure out how to get there most directly. Akin to sailing a sailing boat across the sea. You won't just jump in the boat and hope for the best. You've got to know how to tend the sails. You've got to know exactly the direction you've got to go in. You've got to know how to tack and jibe all the way down, subject to the weather. And you've got to know how to read the charts. And you've got to know how to put up with tough weather. So there's ways to get skilled up as a sailor to get to the place you want to be, obviously. And lots of people start that process at the skills level and just get a feel for what's going on and get attached to people and start to build relationships inside the system. And that's fantastic. Yeah. For the record, if you are a current skills subscriber at $10 a month, we're going up to $25 a month. Okay. We have done already. But if you're an existing $10 subscriber, you're grandfathered into the systems level at $25 if you get moving. This is the last week this week to be able to grandfather up to systems, which is a $49 subscription, but you can get there for $25 for the next couple of months if you're quick, just for the record. Now, systems is a different level altogether because that puts you in the hub. So you're continually being communicated to by the coaching team, and you have the ability 24/5 to be able to contact that coaching team through the Telegram channels to get access to help and assistance. But more important than that, You get to liaise with other members of the community who are more than happy to help. We're more than happy to help each other. That's the whole idea of this system. And if you really want to get moving, which is where most successful people are, the people who are the penny's dropping now in terms of what it is to build a balance sheet, build critical mass, reallocate balance sheet to cash flow and continually do that. And many of the income people actually help us strategize inside what are called the DBM workspaces every single day. That's how sophisticated they are. So we'll help each other through what it takes then to sit in front. And again, at the second half of this call, you'll hear the results of some of that communication and discussion as we talk about a project that's now the second most valuable digital asset on the planet. A lot of how we've orchestrated how to convert that into three different $1,000 per month income streams has come from the workspaces. This is the power of what's going on over here. You can't just buy success. You can't just throw money at something and hope it's going to work out. You have to invest in yourself and work through the process. Yeah, that's best served up at the income level. Now, we work on three main pillars. You'll hear now in the next couple of minutes why these three main pillars are so important, particularly Bitcoin. Because at this stage, at least, even though it's moving very quickly now towards stable coins as well, at this stage, most of the governments and the bosses and the institutions are focused on Bitcoin. Now, we've been focused on Bitcoin for well over a decade. It's almost twee now. It's almost obvious, you know? And this is some of the interesting things about this industry, that if you take the time and step back a second and just turn the TV off and stop the bread and circus and just take a breath and have a look at how the world works, which is all we've been doing for the last decade, and then figure out how to get hold of sound money, and then just wait for the moment, which has now happened, whereby everybody else understands sound money has to be part of the economics of the world. We can't just keep throttling people to death with fiat system. Then you start to get that vindication. And it's that then, if you've got enough of it, that will fund the rest of your life. So Bitcoin is obviously a key part of that. But as I said before, it's not just about equity. You have to find ways, in my opinion, to move that equity, the revaluation of your balance sheet, which in this industry happens very quickly, very, very quickly. You have to convert a proportion of that balance sheet into your P&L to drive cash flow. And we predominantly do that, as you saw earlier, where you saw some of those monthly yields that we're used to these days, which is still an anomaly in the global scheme of things, 5, 6, 7, 8% a month, 10% a month yields. That's predominantly driven through smart contracts, where companies are looking for liquidity in order for them to carry out their functions in AI technologies, in trading, or in over the counter. Yeah. And again, it's early, it's relatively new as a technology, but we're right in front of it. And that gives us the ability then to put yield into our lives, all the while proportioning some of that yield back to grow equity through Bitcoin. And it just repeats itself. It's just a cycle. And as we see now, as Bitcoin heads back towards all-time highs, we anticipate that to happen this month or into May. Then again, we get the opportunity to leverage our balance sheet through what's called collateralization. And we drive some of that collateral back to what are becoming increasingly proven entities as the weeks go by. So it just becomes easier and easier and easier and easier for us to be able to confidently allocate collateral from the balance sheet across to reallocation. That's the clever bit. And we're not there yet, in my opinion. There's still work to do, right? Because there's still things that we can't understand because they've not been done yet. But we're primed, perfectly positioned, because we keep our eyes open with regards to what it is for individuals to be able to take control of their own digital asset-based balance sheet and then reallocate to more and more proven cash flowing entities. Now, if you really want to get into something that's mind-blowing, actually, then you start to look at not just Bitcoin and USDT as two separate entities. You start to look at the altcoin space, which is even more dynamic and even more difficult. But then you're in control of equity plus yield in the same system. And we just happen to have come across over the years, more luck than judgment, I promise you, the now second most valuable digital asset on the planet after Bitcoin, that provides us exactly that: ongoing equity plus ongoing yield on a consistently proven basis. And I'll show you exactly what the numbers look like on that in the second half of this call. Real quick, again, if you haven't got the stomach for some of the stuff I'm just about to talk about, or you haven't got the stomach for getting in position to being closer to the money supply, then this industry is not for you. If you want the safety net of a boss and a bank and a government and a pension plan and a stockhold and all the rest of it, if you want the safety net of all that, then be willing to pay for it. If you're not willing to pay for it, which is the position you should be, then convert the fear of a lot of the macro and global economic stuff that we're going to talk about now into value, and put it as part of your being as to what it is for you to understand how to be successful in this industry. Because whether you like it or not, if you're going to get involved with what it takes to be closer to the money supply, then you also have a responsibility, which is becoming increasingly the case, and it's only really been happening this past year, that you need to understand these big picture outlooks. And this isn't for everybody. Most people in my experience just haven't got the stomach for it. They're willing to throw money at things and hope for the best. They're willing to try and buy success, just like they play the lottery or hope the house is going to go up in price or hope for a pay rise. There's plenty of people with that mindset, but there's very few people with the mindset to say, I've taken responsibility now, I've done something, and now I need to make sure you understand. Right? But if you are going to be close to the money supply at $3,000 per ounce of gold and $100,000 Bitcoin, which is a pure symptom of us being closest to the money supply, which is where all these values are coming from, then you've got to understand what's happening and why it's happening and what's going to happen next. And that can be a pleasurable, rewarding experience if you determine you're going to take the responsibility to understand it. We do get people to this day saying to us, I'm not interested in what's going on with politics. I don't really understand it. Oh, I can't do economics. Can you do it for me? No, we can't. What we're trying to do on this call is to summarize the major headlines of the preceding week so that we can prepare and be ready for what's coming this week, which is why we do this call on a Monday. Right? So a little bit of an insight there just into the mindset side of things that you just need to be part of. If it's not for you, then this industry is not for you. But at the end of the day, if you're involved, then you've got a duty of care to finish what you start, right? So the big key indicators, we say this every week now, and M2, this chart on the top right here, I know it's small, but you can blow it up in the recording. But in terms of the M2 money supply, we're working with a 12-week future here, okay? And as we said a couple of weeks ago, we've just started that process, which is why you're seeing Bitcoin going back up to all-time highs. It's absolutely correlating to what's called M2 money supply. Yeah, now that's a big cheat sheet that we've applied many, many times over the years, where we can start to predict and have a look. And what's most interesting this time, though, is more than just M2 going on. There's much more than just M2 going on. And this is why it gives us even more confidence to double down in terms of what we do in owning the money supply, especially as much of that's now driven off the back of gold, of course, but now Bitcoin, which is even faster. Okay, so the first quantitative easing is happening as we speak since 2021. We fully expect the Fed to succumb to pressure and cut interest rates. They're already late. They're already late. And that is an interesting thing to watch between politics and party politics and frankly mischievousness. But then you get into the conversation yet again of, is it ignorance or is it complicity? We used to get upset about, all this that was going on with the central banks, but these days, because we're so far ahead of them, we just observe and watch the movie, frankly, which is a very nice place to be, knowing that the vast majority of the populations of the world are being used and abused by that system, which is why we work so hard at DBM to help people not to be abused by it. Now, the other big dynamic going on is this Bitcoin reserves on actual exchanges is now at record lows. Now that's key, because as today, on the 28th of April, Mike Saylor yet again announces he's going to buy X millions of dollars of Bitcoin. Where's he buying that from? Well, he's buying it OTC, buying it over the counter. It's not buying it off the exchanges. But that's a falling reserve as well. So there's less and less and less Bitcoins available, 400 odd Bitcoin, minted over time. They're demanding on even just the ETFs are demanding much more than that, let alone Mike Saylor and everybody else. Then it's obvious that the supply becomes less and less as demand goes up and up. And what do you think happens to Bitcoin? That's why Bitcoin will push past $200,000 by the end of this calendar year. Now, if we know that already, because we've got our eye on this type of stuff, as opposed to just sat in traffic, commuting, listening to the radio or watching movies, then we can put ourselves ahead much more quickly than the average person. And then it goes even deeper when you're looking at some of the macro levels. This week, we've had it confirmed that you've got the Cantor Fitzgerald, the Tether, the Bitfinex launching multi-billion-dollar Bitcoin acquisitions. Yeah. Again, if you don't know who Cantor Fitzgerald are, etc., then go and do your research. And it's very, very interesting to watch that, because all they're doing is slipstreaming what's been going on with strategy over the past 4 years now. So, or certainly since 2020. That used to be called MicroStrategy. Then you've got other dynamics going on, such as the Swiss banks, buying up strategy stock, but still in a bit of a turmoil as to their decision as a Swiss bank. The Swiss bank, as to buy Bitcoin directly. Now, you've got some brinkmanship going on there between the European Union and what's happening with nations that sit within that geography, not necessarily in the union, but in the geography. So you've got all this going on, and obviously we understand the power of Switzerland when it comes to global finance. So there's some brinkmanship going on, but I just think they're swimming against the tide. There's just no way. Okay, but the fact they're buying up strategy stock is indirectly acquiring Bitcoin, right? And they'll be doing the same with 21 and all the rest of it. So it's just interesting. On the other side, over in the US, ARK just acquired last week another $267 million of Bitcoin as a private fund. Yeah. So the banks and the private funds are in a bit of a dance, but no prizes for guessing who's going to win that. Yeah. Jack Mallers, many of you may have heard of. 21 Capital has just been launched last week, replicating, like I say, the strategy model to accumulate mass amounts of Bitcoin. Now, we're interested in this. So think about this logically. We've spent the last decade taking high risks, first of all, in accumulation of Bitcoin, but then in the allocation of yields into cash flow through private companies, private projects, private altcoins, ideas, concepts. Yeah, we've spent well over a decade doing that. And we're good at it, right? But your heart's in your mouth every time you're doing it, especially if you're working with other people, because it's new. Like I say, we're startup investors. That's what we do. We're startup investors. And we've done very well out of that. Thank you very much. And you've got the MLM brigade that's come in and turned it into a bit of fun for everybody. Everybody thinks it's a game. It's not a game. It's a business, right? So we've been through all that. And we'll continue to work through that. Every single one of the companies that I've identified earlier on the sectors we work in are still viable. They're still operational. It's still there. They're just not as fast or apparent as we want. That's just the nature of what it is. But you've got to then start looking. If you've not already started doing this, you want to start thinking about it. Have you got strategy stock? Are you looking at bit bonds? Are you looking at how to get involved with 21 Capital? Are you figuring out what it is to operate under Bitcoin per share as opposed to EPS? Do you know what EPS is? So you see, while we'll carry on doing what we do on the much more, let's call it, amateur level, no question, our future also resides in the big professional level. Now, that's something I never thought I'd be saying. Because for the longest time, it's been about using Bitcoin as a separation, as a difference to what goes on with macroeconomics. But with the likes of these three companies now, it's becoming easier and easier and easier for normal people like us to take shares in these companies. And again, if you don't know how to do that, then that's what we do in the workspace, and that's how we help each other all the time to figure out how to go and buy stock. So are you educating yourself? Are you getting ahead of the curve? Are you preparing for what's inevitable? Yeah. Now, all the while, we absolutely still stand by the premise at DBM that you should be self-sovereign. Don't get me wrong. You should be self-sovereign. What you'll find as you get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, that self-sovereignty, while it's a great idea and it's very romantic, it can put you under a lot of pressure because one false move and you're finished. Yeah. That's why security, listen to what the coaches are doing all the time about security and multi-sig and how to set up for cold wallets, right? Prepare now if you're serious about building yourself towards generational wealth. Yeah, self-sovereignty is still sacrosanct, but think about how you can start to own Bitcoin through third parties as well. Why not? Because what's clear now, and this has just happened in the last couple of weeks, Bitcoin seems to be decoupling from stock market prices and charts, etc. For the longest time, it sort of ran together, and now it's decoupled. In fact, we're starting to see the gold Bitcoin chart for the first time in a long time. We're starting to see gold being sold and people moving back into Bitcoin or moving into Bitcoin. And I think that will accelerate over the next few months. Okay, so these are all the dynamics we're looking for because at the end of the day, we're here to monetize chaos. We're here to monetize chaos. And don't take that as chaos in the sense of uncontrolled. Understand what we mean when we talk about monetizing chaos, because the world is chaos. And all we're doing is pinning a proportion of that chaos to something that's immutable. That's what we mean by monetizing chaos, right? Last but not least, earnings season this week in the US. Always very interesting. All right, keep an eye on that. And hold your nerve, hold your nerve, hold your nerve, which basically means hodling your assets. Never, ever sell your assets. Ever. Now, geopolitics. Even more intense when it comes to understanding what's going on because you've got a load of old men somewhere in the world arguing over something, and it's very difficult to keep up with them, frankly. But we've known about that forever. Yeah, we know complicity or ignorance is what governments are built on. We don't worry about that anymore. We just do our best to read between the lines, just like we did or learned to do after the great financial crash, just like we learned to do since quantitative easing has been a thing, just like we did through COVID, and just like we're doing again now through tariffs. We just read between the lines. We don't get upset about it anymore. And we certainly don't get drawn along by the mass media. So inevitably, what you're finding happening, as I said every week now, you're finding just a slow movement away from the traditional structure of geopolitics. Yeah, you're finding the BRICS getting stronger. You're finding the US or the North America take itself to a new place. Okay, it's trying to have its cake and eat it at the moment, obviously, by driving tariffs in to reset currencies. If you're part of that currency reset with us, well done. If you don't know what that is, then see in the workspaces. It's all about understanding which currencies to hold and own, along with Bitcoin, along with gold, to take advantage of that global reset. Yeah, it's going to happen now. It's inevitable. It has to happen because the US has determined that it wants to bring back the ability for it to look after itself in pharmaceuticals, in IT, in car manufacturing, in food production, and everything else. It wants to become self-dependent. It's isolating itself from what was the geopolitical world and globalization world that we've had since the 70s. Things are changing quickly, right? That's going to have implications on bond markets, yields. They need to reduce the strength of the dollar. That's going to put pressure on the Chinese. They're then going to capitulate and move back into some level of sound economics again. How long that takes, we don't know. All the way along, it doesn't really matter because all this brinkmanship just puts more and more and more focus on individuals and companies looking for safe harbors, which is why gold and Bitcoin are going up in price. So we just ride that through. All right. In the meantime, the UK, the EU, Canadians, even though there's a Canadian vote going on today, so we'll see. Hopefully they bring it in. The new guy who is a pro-Bitcoin guy and get rid of, ex-central bankers. You need to be working with pro-Bitcoin people if you're in Canada. But either way, those three jurisdictions certainly currently have immutable bureaucracy. They have no clue where they're headed. And they're just in the middle between China and the States. So something's going to give there, all right? And it should manifest itself in finally, we're hopeful, finally, but nothing else, that it saves people being killed as we get to some sort of peace deal between the manifestation of what it is between BRICS and the West, which is Ukraine. Okay, the proxy war. So let's see how all this shakes out. Either way, we're sat poised. And if you're listening to me on this with regards to sanctions, and you know you're involved with a project that's been embroiled in those sanctions, remember what I said before, if you're going to get closer to the money supply, then you are going to get embroiled, as we've learned this past couple of years, in global politics, whether you like it or not. Yeah, we're doing our best to interpret that. We've no control over it, obviously, but we can interpret it and put our sense of opinion in, which is what I've just done. All right. Now, once the resets happen and everything starts to rebalance in global politics, etc., then what you're going to find is this CBDC versus, let's call it gold-back or possibly Bitcoin-backed stablecoin currency issuance. Now, either of those two doesn't matter to us, because at the end of the day, the premise of understanding that currency will always devalue against assets means the assets go up, which means we can keep driving and doing what I've just been talking about for the past 20 minutes, even with central bank digital currencies. But those of us who observe CBDCs, what we do observe is this concept of control. People can see where you're spending your money, in other words. And that's not something we're necessarily happy about in terms of how we see the world. Whereas the collaborations going on with the rest of the world, which is mainly driven by BRICS and possibly the US, in fact, not possibly, it's likely now strongly to be the US, where they're going to go against and up against CBDCs with digital currencies that are actually backed by something, yeah, gold, Bitcoin, etc. That's probably going to be the winner. The EU seem to be stepping back from their September timeline. No longer are they saying CBDCs will be installed in September. They're saying CBDCs will be put into the politics of decision-making from September. That can take years, if not decades, to come to pass. So I think they're just keeping their options open personally now. Either way, they're going to observe, but they are going to be left behind if the EU doesn't stop being an immutable bureaucracy. It has to become more dynamic. You need business people in charge of the EU, not these career politicians. That's just my opinion. Okay, try not to touch the screen there, Charlie. Tariffs, etc. Swiss banks, first of all. The Swiss banks we mentioned earlier. That's just worth reiterating, because at the end of the day, you've got lots going on there with regards to the Swiss making decisions, despite Brussels trying harder and harder to compete with CBDCs. So just keep an eye on that. That's all we're suggesting there. And obviously tariffs, nobody knows where that's going to go. Not even Donald Trump. They've come up with this concept where they need to use the tariffs as a sledgehammer to get people to do things. That's definitely happened. The New World Order is in play, and most people are now bending the knee to the US. That's having beneficial effects, actually, over gold and Bitcoin, which is what we're interested in. But, richest man in Babylon, you don't want to be the richest man in the street. Everybody has to be equaled out. So where that goes is where we're watching next, but that's just an observation more than anything else. Okay, so that's that. Now, to finish this part of the call, just a reminder, if you want to get into more detail and conversation about how all this works, not just in terms of the macro stuff, but how we do what we're going to talk about next, which is the actual practical realities of converting this information and knowledge into real income. And that's what part 2 of this call is all about, which I'll go to next if you're here live. And if you're listening to this in a recording, click below and you'll see the part 2 available over at the Systems Forum. I'll see you on the next call.